Team Leader for Governance and Institutional Strengthening, and I'm joined by. And I'm Julieanne. Pleasure to be here. I work for Neomai. Being the last session of the day, we'll either see smiles. We'll see a couple of people nodding off, so if you hear me going louder, trying to wake you up. Or I might see some upset people. So as Julie and I prep the lunch, we will keep to the 30 minutes. And if we don't, just wave your hand at us and we'll get off. So on behalf of our director, I would like to thank the chair of this working group, the PILON Secretariat, for giving us this time this afternoon. When they said, could you come and speak? We said, sure. When? Thursday. All right, what time? Last session. I looked at Julieanne and thought, should we take it or not? Because this is the hardest one to close any day off with. But this afternoon is really to briefly share with you something similar to what you are working on. And I guess to share with you the connected regional group, but also the connected piece to what you are currently working on as a group this week. It's nice to come here today, as I had shared, a long association with PILON. As an observer to PILON, the bigger body, but also specific observer to this working group, because it aligns closely to a particular area of work that we work on ending violence against women. So I'm sorry I came in late today, but as I walked in listening even about the victim support officers, the room, many years ago as I sat in with the same working group as you started to brainstorm on this document that you are unpacking this week. I shared with Julieanne, some of these were dreams for many of your countries. So it's nice to come this week and to see the offices, but also to see the progress that you've made in your respective countries. We just have three things to cover this afternoon. As I said, we're going to keep to the time that was provided to us. Some of you will be aware of SBC and the technical work it does in your countries. Julieanne and I are part of the Human Rights and Social Development Division. It's one of the newest divisions for SBC. And for some of you, be hearing of this division for the first time, but we've worked with PILON for many years. We've worked, I guess, one iteration or one part of our division has worked closely with many of you in your practice, but some of you as students, as you were working to attain your practicing certificate. So can I get a show on those that have worked or have heard of the Regional Rights Resource Team, RRT? Okay, so that's us, just with a different name, the Human Rights and Social Development Division, and a broader mandate. So RRT used to have a mandate on human rights in SBC, so working with a lot of you in the area of human rights, but particularly on ending violence against women. In this new division that we have now merged since 2021, we also take on the portfolio of gender equality, youth development, and culture. So it's the same, that same division, but with a broader mandate. We wanted to share with you this afternoon, I guess, a regional working group that Julie coordinates from our office, which has a similar role to what PILON does with lawyers, but this is with the broad government ministries that lead on the family protection legislation. And to give you an example, you're, I guess, a little bit more in the front than us in terms of looking at what we like to view a regional good, a regional tool that takes best practices, but would apply to all national governments to adapt into your national setting. And that's specifically looking at gender-based violence counseling. As I said, our division now has a broader mandate. I won't unpack all of it, but I wanted to hone in specifically on the focus area that I lead, or the one that I oversee in our division. And essentially, it's the work that we do with Pacifica government and state institutions. Very broad. Any ministry or government department that is looking at embedding or implementing your country's human rights and gender equality obligations. So we've worked with many of your officers through either capacity strengthening, through the work or the journey on the development of your family protection legislation. In Tonga, we've worked with the Ministry of Justice, with the Legal Aid and Family Protection Center, Solomon Islands, working with the Ministry for Women and Ministry for Justice in the rollout on the pilot program that's looking at your authorized justices, piloting it in Guadalcanal and Malaika. So we're now moving from a lot of our focus on legislation and policy to really working with you all to bring life to those policies and legislation. And as I always say to our colleagues in the division, it's nice to work with drafters to draft beautiful laws. But if those laws can't be implemented in the main center and outer island, it defeats having those laws in place. So a lot of our work is spent working closely with your officers and related ministries to test how effective these laws are. Because we can all write, we can all develop beautiful policies and beautiful legislation, but the real test for all of us is what does the services look like for our people? And do they actually do what they said they would do? So Julie will now take us through this regional working group. But essentially, as I said to you, many of you will remember us with the work that we did with all of you in your domestic violence laws. And so we came to a point where we asked ourselves as a division, is our work done? Now that many of these laws will pass. And I think one of the questions we asked ourselves was, what is the reason we came into this work to draft the laws alone, or to see that these laws were implemented on the ground? And this is where we started this journey with this regional working group. And I'll hand this over to Julie.
Thanks, Neomai. Okay, so many of you might know that the first domestic violence legislation was passed by Vanuatu in 2008. Since then, there have been 14 more in passed in the region. So in 2018, 10 years after Vanuatu passed this legislation, the Regional Rights Resource Team of SPC brought together senior government officials and representatives to discuss how the region is faring in terms of implementing the legislation in their respective jurisdictions. During the discussions at that meeting, the countries recognized that there was a need to work together. Some countries like Vanuatu had been 10 years into the journey. Others were not much more recent. There was space to be able to learn from each other. Because the Pacific, we know, they're very remote, they have similar challenges, there's a lot to be learned from each other. So in 2018, the Regional Working Group on the Implementation of Family Protection, Domestic Violence Legislation was established. And RRT at that time was invited to be Secretariat. So I came in a short while after and acted as Secretariat since then. So I'm also quite 4 years into my own journey. Yeah. So the only criteria for becoming part of this regional working group, as we call it, is that you would have to have domestic violence legislation in the country. The membership is Chief Executive Officer, Permanent Secretary or Director level positions of ministries that have the mandate to either coordinate or implement the domestic violence legislation. In the region, this usually lies with either the Ministry of Justice or Women, sometimes also with the Attorney General's office. So currently, the chair, it has a terms of reference that guides its work. The current chair of the regional working group is the Ministry of Women's and Social Development Affairs of the Government of Nauru. So Secretary Joy is chair. The deputy chair is in Solomon Islands, so the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Justice and Legal Affairs in Solomon Islands. The roles are rotated every 2 years and representing geographical diversity. So this year is Micronesia, next year will be Solomon Islands, the year after, so 2 years after that will be Polynesia again. So there are currently 14 members of countries and states that are part of the regional working group. So they include Cook Islands, FSM National Government, Botswana State, Pohnpei State, Fiji, Kiribati, Republic of Marshall Islands, Nauru, PNG, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. There are 2 other countries with DB laws, Palau and Niue, but they are not yet part of the regional working group, but they are plans to explore this year. So what's the purpose of the regional working group? So it comes together annually to share information and good practices in relation to the implementation of legislation in their respective countries and states, with the hope that the other members can pick and learn some these good practices that they are implementing in their countries and states. They also discuss and implement common regional strategies and initiatives, and Neomai did mention this a little bit while she was talking. We are currently, together with our crisis center partners and women, working to develop a regional guideline for the gender-based violence. And I'll touch on that a little bit more later. So the regional working group also has priority areas. So at the first annual meeting in 2019, the participants at the meeting were asked to come up with a list of priorities that they wanted to. So they were basically they were asked to prioritize. First one. Their service people, advisory council committees, so these is in place to guide and coordinate the laws. Then there was data monitoring and evaluation. So members recognize that this was a gap readily available. Where it was quite difficult to measure like outcomes and the impacts of legislation if it wasn't available. This policy basis. Last one, big smile. So similar to what PILON is doing now with the development of the regional guidelines. Oh, familiar faces? Anybody recognize anyone there? The regional working group, together with Fiji Women's Crisis Center, Public Support Center, 5 crisis centers in the region, and UN Women are also developing what we are calling regional gender-based violence against women counseling framework or a guideline. Yeah? So this is being built off national counseling guidelines and frameworks of Tonga, Solomon Islands, and Kiribati, and FWCC and Pacific Women's Network Against Violence Against Women, gender-based violence. counseling package. So the aim of this is that these have been tried and tested in the Pacific. It works. Now, there are other countries out there that do not have anything like this. What is there in the Pacific that is working that we can take and replicate and adapt in other countries? So this is currently, we are currently doing this, and we hope that we'll have something in place soon. So the gender-based violence counseling framework or guideline would be there so that national government or gender-based violence counseling services can take and align to it, yes, serve as a standard for the region. And in doing so, contribute to more effective and responsive services and strengthening the implementation of domestic violence legislation, which is the mandate of the regional body. So, through developing the regional the regional guidelines that you now have, your work supports the initiatives that we are taking forward in that sector. We are all working together because it contributes to ensuring that there is justice to survivors of gender-based violence. There is more effective implementation of domestic violence legislation. And as duty bearers, this is being accountable to human rights holders. So it has been 5 years since the regional working group was established. There have been learnings. One of the key ones that I wish to share today, and one that the regional working group has consistently highlighted, is the challenge with coordination, information sharing between government ministries and institutions that contribute to the work ending gender-based violence at the national level. So at the national and state levels, there are various mechanisms to coordinate support provided to survivors and victims. Either they provided for by legislation or they are set up registered. In some of our domestic violence legislation in the region, I think there's about 4. There are also bodies that are set up and mandated to coordinate and implement reports. For example, the Kiribati domestic violence legislation provides for an advisory council to advise and make recommendations to the minister responsible for women's affairs. Now, without key information and data, it does become very, very difficult to make policy decisions about resourcing, future priorities, and things like that. So I think at this juncture, I just want to leave this with you. As you move on into day 3, I understand that you will be developing national implementation plans for it to take back. It is important that we think about how our work contributes to the overall picture, not just your role in the justice sector, but the connectors in our work. How you are connected to the other stakeholders in country, and the national mechanisms that are in place. How do you ensure that the relevant information is being shared and fed by our organizations to the people that sit in these mechanisms and the people that make the decisions? For example, Solomon Islands, the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Justice, is the chair, and I'm looking at the Solomon Islanders here, of the Family Protection Advisory Council. This council reports to the minister, who then tables the report in Parliament. How can we make sure that the minister is receiving information about how many prosecutors have been trained on this guideline? How many more need to be trained? how much money is needed. These are important things that we need to keep at the back of our minds when we go into that. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, the purpose of all that we do in our different sectors comes back to putting survivors and victims of sexual and gender-based violence at the front. Yeah. And we need to ensure that we share information, coordinate, and collaborate. With that, my job here is done. I hope we get through the 30 minutes. If you have any questions, my boss is here.
Monitoring and evaluation is quite a difficult one, and not just one faced by small jurisdictions, it's equally faced by big jurisdictions, so implementing in wide areas. One of the things that we've started as a regional working group about 2 years ago, previous to this, and you all will know this in your work, when people ask you, what is the status of gender-based violence in your country? What does violence against women and girls look like in your country? We can say it's a big problem, but we can say this as anecdotal information that we see with our clients, with our stakeholders. A lot of our countries don't have concrete data to back this. Even when COVID happened, a lot of resources were coming, but a lot of our partners that wanted to give resources were asking, where's the data that shows that the statistics have risen? And a lot of our countries didn't have this. So 2 years ago, we started with our membership to do a baseline in terms of all of our various legislation, where when your law says all this provision, what have you done? What does implementation look like? It was great. They all did it for us at the moment. We're calling it a quick and dirty tool, because many countries are still trying to find a monitoring and evaluation system that will suit your country. So we asked them, before the annual meeting, tell us against all of this, from justice to health to counseling, implementation plan, have a budget. All of your laws have some aspect of this in the provision. Tell us if you have it. Show us the evidence. So on the first year, they all rated quite highly. They're self-rating, it's a self-rating tool. Many of them were between 70 to 80, almost some of them were to the early 90s. They felt really good. So the 1 year between then and our next annual meeting, we said to them, Julie and our colleagues will come to countries and we'll deal with you virtually to say, if you say this, give us the evidence. We start filing it on your behalf. By the time the next annual meeting came, we said to them, last year, this is how you rated yourself. In the 1 year, as we looked through the evidence you gave us, this is what you looked like. And all of them dropped. They were quite upset with us. They didn't like that session. But at that point, it was also talking to them about the importance of data. We can say that we have trained many lawyers, but where are those lawyers? When we talk about the access to justice, are they only in Honiara? What about the cases that you say are appearing out there in Guadalcanal? Are those lawyers out there? If you say you've trained 100 police officers in PNG, where are they? Where are they, and how many clients did they serve? And so again, it was asking, this wonderful thing on, yes, you give us all this information, but at the end of the day, what does it look like in communities? Because for us, when we're working with the regional working group, if 10 years and you all say you are around 80 to 90%, that means survivors on the ground should be receiving the best services. There shouldn't be challenges happening. There shouldn't be when COVID happened or when the weekend hits or when Christmas time comes, they're not going to the crisis center saying that I've been sent away from this center. Is that happening? So a lot of them are saying yes. So then there's a problem somewhere. So we hope we get to a stage. I know I'm not answering this because there isn't a set, if I could say, set monitoring and evaluation way for each country, but we are trying to develop a regional tool that encourages the importance of data collection. Because all of you will know in your own offices, I think one country asked us to advise on the amendment of a provision that looked at protection orders. And then we asked them how many orders have been accessed for a temporary order, for an emergency order, for a final order. They couldn't give us the numbers. So we said to them, as a regional body, I feel very uncomfortable advising you on which one you should make an amendment on, because I don't even know in the last 5 to 6 years if anyone has accessed any of these orders that the law has provided. So for us at this point, we're trying to work with our members to say it's important to get the data. Talk to across ministries to get the data, but then how do we collect it to be able to say, what is this picture telling us? Because for many of your countries, when your law came into place, it was because of the family health and safety studies that were saying our statistics were very high. Now we've got laws in your countries, has that made a change? And so for a lot of us to answer that question, we need the data. Because if the data says the stats are coming, or the stats are continuing to rise, but you have strong laws, you have strong services, then where's the problem? Where's the problem of the law in the first place? But to be able to answer that question, we're constantly having to work with our members to collect data. So to whoever asked the question, I'm sorry I'm not directly answering what you asked, but sort of giving you an example on how we're trying to work with our members to address this. One way is by this, us appearing here. We work with our national governments, but as Julie said, our membership, I think only Samoa is Ministry of Justice. The rest are mostly Ministry for Women or affiliated Ministry of Internal Affairs. And so they don't actually hold a lot of the data that is needed. So we work with PILON, we work with the Pacific Islands Chief of Police, with the PJSP, because there are other regional bodies that have mandates with these various arms that maybe the Ministry for Women or the Ministry of Internal Affairs is struggling to tap into. Any final questions for us? And I guess our parting point is, Julie is going to stay here for the remainder of your meeting. We're quite keen to support you on your national plans, because as Julie said, if you're able to deliver it, we see that it contributes back to the bigger picture of bringing lives to your laws. So I guess at the end of this meeting, we'll continue to liaise with the PILON Secretariat and some of you directly. If we can be of support to your national plans, we'll continue that conversation later. But thank you for this opportunity to come and present.